Hey YouTube, yesterday, August 5th, 2011, for the first time in its history, the United States credit was downgraded by a major credit rating agency, Standard & Poor's. This news has probably gone right past most ordinary Americans, and it's probably just as well, because if this had to happen, the circumstances of it having happened is relatively benign. Okay. I've checked it out. Everybody is lying. Everybody is spinning. And the bottom line is, this is not Armageddon. Okay. When this is all a real downgrade and not some stunt. And please understand that what S&P has done is a stunt. They've pulled this in Ireland. They've done it in Europe. They inject themselves into the political dialogue and try to suggest policy, which is to dictate it. Moody's, on the other hand, as the other major blood-sucking, fraudulent credit agency out there, and I must admit my bias, these people are horrible. Moody's doesn't care how you get anything, a balanced budget, or how you get solvency. They don't care one way or another how you do it. And Standard & Poor's gets a little more lost in the media and a little more mediaized in its thinking, and it wants to inject itself into the dialogue in terms of the most realistic way of getting to a goal. And that becomes taking charge. Okay. And this is the ominous sign of things to come, because in Europe this has already happened, where Standard & Poor's is actually taking over. Okay. They're usurping the banks in being the last word in public policy. And Europe has struck back by laying an antitrust suit on Standard & Poor's. And well-deserved. I won't go into the details, but it's well-deserved. They're not as crooked as Moody's. Moody's will just break the law. Its employees will just break the law and think nothing of it, because the power goes to their heads. But Standard & Poor's has been slapped with an anti-monopoly thing. And because Europe can smell what's on the horizon with this. But in the United States, eventually we will be taken over by Moody's and Standard & Poor's. And that's where we're moving toward. And the Tea Party has artificially created a premature crisis where we're there in a kind of dress rehearsal sort of way. None of this is really quite for real, but it is a sign of things to come, okay? Under real circumstances, if we were really being downgraded, no company in the United States rated by Standard & Poor's would get a AAA rating. You would never get a higher rating than the government itself in any given country. And when he was pressed about that on CNN, Chambers just admitted that the United States is nowhere near that kind of status. In effect, Standard & Poor's is making a political statement, and they've done it in Europe, and now they're doing it here. Okay, get your act together. They have looked over the numbers for this new budget deal and actually think it's for real. And I have to wonder how much S&P has actually crunched those numbers. You know, they haven't had that much time to be able to do it. And the Obama administration is right to point out that when S&P informed the Treasury of what it was about to do, the Treasury went over the math and found a $2 trillion error that Chambers, now get this, on 360 admitted to having made, that they made that mistake. And then he said, but there were other factors and we had to do this, and other commentators are going to criticize them for saying, well, you were embarrassed and the train had already left the station and you couldn't go back on it because you'd already informed some people that you were going to do this, and so you're sticking to the downgrade. And yet they're not downgrading any of the companies. I mean, that's just weird, okay? You know, the U.S. companies are not affected by it in any direct way, and that's straight from the horse's mouth. That's what Chambers is saying. Now, let me tell you, for people who don't know how any of this works, S&P gets paid by companies that it rates. You know, they rate the companies for pay. So, I mean, they rated Enron You know, if you can remember Enron going belly up, they gave them a AAA rating, and Enron went belly up. Beginning of a lot of things that culminated in the real estate bubble exploding, and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and all of that pandemonium. Everybody got a AAA rating from Moody's and Fitch and S&P. You know, a legitimate credit rating agency would be evaluating objectively so that investors would know, hey, you know, that's a bad investment. And instead, they were misled because it's a strong question as to how reliable these credit rating agencies are. And they're a lot harder on the government because the government's not paying them to do it. You know, if I was in charge, I'd just pay Moody's to rate me. I'd pay them a whole bunch of money, and they'd never downgrade me. That's how it works. Grease the palm. That's Gurdjieff 101 there. It is. Grease the palm. That's how it works. That's what goes on in this world. But we don't pay them, so we get what we get. But the math was terrible. Chambers admitted to the mistake, and what this amounts to is they're telling their best clientele, their biggest clients, what they were going to do so those clients could shuffle their assets and come away from this without getting burned. It amounts to insider trading, really, or a variant of insider trading. I don't know if trading is exactly the best term for it, but it's inside information that facilitates the old boys club. And you'll never hear it reported that way, but that's the bottom line. You know, if I could, I'd take Anderson Cooper 360, and underneath I would have the plain English translations of what everybody's really saying. It would be fun to do. They even had little Egan Jones up there. That's just a little microscopic rating agency that was the first to downgrade the U.S., and his position was massive teabagger type spending cuts, which translated means don't tax me, you know, from little Egan Jones. I want to be a billionaire someday. And the bigger fish, you know, S&P, the Chambers said, let the Bush tax cuts lapse. And that's what this is really about, and it's not a bad thing. The bottom line is S&P wants the Bush tax cuts to lapse. That's a tremendous savings. I actually agree with that. I think that's in the offing anyways, and they're saying it better happen or else, okay? And come November, when the rest of this budget deficit deal comes due, they're having this commission. Washington has commissions. Commissions are, you know, they litter the streets in Washington with commissions that nobody listens to. And sometimes they're really, really good commissions, and they crunch the numbers and they say responsible things. And I mean, it's usually to please big business, but it's, you know, halfway responsible and as close to responsibility as Washington is ever likely to get, considering, you know, all the beds they're in politically with the money. But nobody listens to the commissions. Nobody ever listens to the commissions. The commissions is just a way of just saying we're going to shelve the problem and look like we're not, you know, because we're going to get back to that commission sometime. Well, they had to agree to a trigger. Okay, the trigger means there'll be massive spending cuts in the event that no one listens to this little blue ribbon commission that they put. The trigger is for massive cuts in spending. And Obama, to his credit, has included massive cuts for defense. Okay. And Republicans, I think he thinks that will compel Congress to actually pay attention to the commission rather than swallow the bitter castor oil of cutting defense, because that's where a lot of their bacon comes from, is the military-industrial complex. Okay. That's their slice of the pie. You know, don't mess with that. But it's still, the purse strings are on Congress. They can bicker about the trigger and how to implement the trigger till doomsday. And what S&P in effect has done is to sound a warning shot that we will seriously downgrade you, and Moody's and Fitch will probably come on board with us in that event, that you promised a deficit reduction and now you can't even get your heads around the trigger. And that can be taken to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, even though it's loaded with Republicans, cannot rule against a law that Congress has implemented. The law demands that they make these cuts, and that will include defense. So it's just a matter of arguing the numbers and the percentages, because the trigger itself is so full of smoke and mirrors that it's very surprising for S&P to take any of it seriously. My honest impression of the budget deficit plan is that it's mostly flim-flam. Okay, but I haven't read it in its totality, and I doubt that S&P has. And having made this massive $2 trillion error in its calculations tells me that this is probably just political for them. It's a political stunt. It's a statement. And they're waving a red flag and saying, get your act together or else. So, if treasuries are considered better than gold, and if the major credit agency that's downgrading us admits publicly that treasuries are better than gold, what's going on that we're being downgraded by that credit agency? I'll tell you what's going on. For the first time in U.S. history, the financial elite is coming forward and saying, unless a certain political faction in Congress is neutralized, there will be hell to pay. And that political faction, in this case, are the teabaggers. Why is it so unusual for the financial community to come out and just all but announce something like this? I'll tell you why. Because they have never been this scared before. They are freaking out about the Tea Party, and they want them out, and believe me, if they want them out, they're out. Before this is all over with, Obama is going to have the U.S. Chamber of Commerce itself eating out of his hand as an alternative to these morons. That's what they've accomplished. You know, I don't have any use for baggers, and I don't have any use for S&P. But at least with S&P, you can follow their reasoning. You know, if only they could add and subtract. That no matter how bad off things are here, all money is relative, and the U.S. dollar is the monetary reserve of the entire world. Okay, you take that out of the equation, the whole house of cards that is the world order just simply falls apart. Nobody wants that. I mean, you're going to get conspiracy theorists who say that's what the bad guys want. No, they don't want that. They don't want that. And so, no, it's not being engineered. It's just that we're wandering off this cliff because of the mindlessness of the whole thing. And the baggers are trying to just expedite the self-destruction. They don't mean to, but they're so ignorant they don't get it. And a lot of this is just reacting to the baggers stonewalling and attaching all this to the debt ceiling, which no other country in the world does. So it's all been insane, and it's all been a three-ring circus, and it's going to get worse in November when this trigger sets in, and you're going to expect Congress to make choices that it's simply not capable of making. It's going to make what we've seen now look like, I mean, it's not going to be a three-ring circus. It's just the inmates taking over the asylum. It's just going to be one howling, nightmarish mess. And it's hard for me to imagine them coming to a real understanding. It's hard for me to imagine it not coming to the Supreme Court. It's hard for me to imagine that Moody's and Fitch aren't going to come on board with S&P, and that it won't be a for real downgrade, and that companies in that case will be affected in serious ways, and pensions are going to be eaten up overnight, and you're talking about $100 billion increase in the deficit like that in the blink of an eye off a falling dollar. So it's all very serious. It should be taken seriously, even though it's something so artificial and phony about it at this moment that it's just like, hey, look at this. There's going to come a time, and it's not too far off, when this is all going to be for real. I mean, Congress is not going to be able to implement a trigger. And Congress is not going to listen to a blue ribbon commission with an election year coming up, and everyone knows it. Okay? So as much as I despise S&P, I don't know as they're wrong to sound the first warning shot about this. Because the bottom line is Congress doesn't work, Congress is completely dysfunctional, and the time is coming when credit rating agencies are going to be the bottom line in fiscal policy. You do not want this to happen. But Congress, you know, their approval rating is at 14% after all of this debacle over the debt ceiling. You know, the White House has held firm at 48%. That's awfully good, considering the beating that Obama has taken. This is a Teflon presidency because everyone else looks bad. Okay? Our one hope in all of this is if we go down, absolutely the whole world goes down, including China. He's going to be holding on to all of our debt paper, and it'll be worthless. Their economy sinks overnight with us, with everybody. No one wants this to happen. Okay? Least of all S&P, Moody's, or Fitch. Okay? Or even little Egan Jones. The U.S. Treasuries may be becoming increasingly worthless, but relative to what's going on in Europe and the mess over there, there's parity going on. It's all relative. It's as relative as physics. Okay? If their austerity program had worked out and was not leading to revolution in Italy and Greece and Portugal and Spain as it is, with massive refugee problem coming across borders, a tremendous humanitarian crisis in the offing sometime, in the next decade. If it was all this wasn't looming over there, we would be in a lot more trouble than we are. But since their austerity program went too far, the way the teabaggers wants to take austerity here too far, okay, and flirt with upheaval in the streets and a police state, which is the inevitable result of what the radical cuts they want to make, which Europe has done, and with disastrous results. And the more of those chickens come home to roost, as it was put on CNN, one person said, the U.S. Treasuries are the cleanest dirty shirt in the heap. And it's the cleanest dirty shirt that smells the least objectionable. And what smells the least objectionable will remain the leading currency. That's the bottom line. That's what's going to keep us afloat. All right? The Lucifer series will tell you when real doom and gloom is coming. But as far as all the other little chicken littles out there who don't understand finance and do not understand the economy, they're just sounding off their own pessimism because exclusively political personalities and people obsessed with politics and political philosophy think pessimistically. They always think in terms of their side as losing. Okay, well, some sides win. Okay? And other sides lose. And it depends on what season you're in as to who's winning, who's losing, who's up, and who's down. All right? Right now, Europe is down for the count. All right? And as long as they're down for the count, and we're a couple of notches up higher, we ain't going down with them. And they sure as hell don't want to see us sink. So there's going to be a lot of looking the other way about a lot of things. So stay tuned come November. The continuing saga of this whole farce.